The Alpha King never touched the Queen. Not in months. Not since the night he realized she wasn't the one his wolf wanted. So when he walked into his chambers that evening and saw her standing there, dressed in silk, glowing in candlelight, his wolf didn't hesitate. He moved behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and whispered, low and certain, "You finally came back to me." But the moment she turned around, everything changed. And this is where I need to take you back. Back to before the silk dress. Back to before the arms. Before the whisper. Back to the girl who was never supposed to exist in the first place. Her name was Elira Vasne, and she was the best-kept secret in the entire Northern Realm. She just didn't know it yet. Chapter 1. There are two kinds of invisible. The first kind is forgotten. People once saw you, once knew you, and then let you slip from memory the way water slips through open hands. The second kind is different. It is deliberate. Someone made you invisible on purpose. And for 19 years, Elira Vasne had lived as the second kind, without ever knowing which one she was. She moved through the Ashveil Palace the way smoke moves through a cracked door. Quietly, purposefully, without disturbing a single thing. She had been assigned to the East Wing for 3 years now, since the day she turned 16 and aged out of the ward house in the Borderlands and applied for palace service because there was nowhere else to go. Palace service was a life. Not a comfortable one. Not a chosen one. But a life. And Elira had learned to make peace with the things that couldn't be changed. Her mornings started before dawn. She was always the first maid in the corridor, stone floors cold beneath her soft leather shoes, her dark hair braided tight, her grey uniform pressed clean. She didn't speak unless addressed. She didn't look unless it was necessary. She moved fast, worked thorough, and disappeared before anyone noticed she'd been there. That was the rhythm of her days. Dust the vanity. Replace the candles. Fold the linens. Check the fire. She had done it so many times she could do it with her eyes closed. But there was one room in the East Wing that never felt ordinary. The Queen's private chamber. Elira couldn't explain it. It wasn't the furnishings. Every room in the palace was draped in things she couldn't afford to dream about. It wasn't the light, or the scent of the Queen's heavy floral perfume that clung to everything like a held breath. It was something else. Something that pressed against the air in that room like a question with no answer. Like something waiting. She'd felt it every time she entered. She'd never understood it. Until the evening of the 23rd of the frost month. The Queen had left in a hurry. That much was clear. The vanity drawers were open. Jewelry lay scattered, 2 necklaces, a comb, a ring she hadn't chosen. The fire had burned low, half attended. And there, across the foot of the wide bed, a dress. Silver silk. Left behind like an afterthought. Elira set her cleaning tray down on the side table. She crossed to the bed. She reached for the dress, meaning only to fold it, to place it on the chair, to move on. But the moment her fingers touched the fabric, she stopped. It was the softest thing she had ever felt in her life. Not soft like her worn blanket back at the ward house. Not soft like the expensive towels she laundered for the nobles. This was different. This was the kind of softness that felt like it didn't belong to the ordinary world. Like it existed in a different category of things entirely. She picked it up. She held it up to the candlelight. It shimmered. Silver like moon water. Silver like something ancient. She looked at the door. She listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No guards. No voice in the corridor outside. Just the fire crackling low. Just the wind against the high window. Just her. And the silence. And the dress. She told herself she only wanted to see one moment. One single moment of understanding what it felt like to be the kind of person who wore something like this. Not envy. Not ambition. Something older than either. Something she still couldn't name. She slipped it on. Her hands trembled as she worked the fastenings at the back. She breathed in. She turned to the full-length mirror in the corner of the room. And the girl looking back at her was a stranger. A beautiful, unfamiliar stranger. The silk gathered at her waist like it had been cut to her specific measurements, not the Queen's. The silver set off something deep in her dark eyes. Made them warmer, more present, more real. She reached up. She pulled the braid loose. Her dark hair fell around her shoulders in waves. And something inside her, something that had been pressed down so long it had forgotten what air felt like, lifted. Just slightly. Just enough to hurt. She looked like someone who existed. She looked like someone who mattered. And she had 3 full seconds to feel it. Before the door opened behind her. She didn't hear it. Didn't see it in the mirror. Not until. Arms wrapped around her from behind. Firm. Warm. Certain. Not violent. Not frightening. But unmistakably, completely possessive. Like she was something being held. Like she was something claimed. The scent hit her before anything else. Pine resin. Cold winter air. Embers deep in old stone. Warm and ancient and entirely, absolutely male. Her breath stopped. Her heart did too. And then the voice came, low, close, brushing the curve of her ear like it had done this 1,000 times before. You finally came back to me. Chapter 2. She spun. The arms loosened just enough to let her. And she found herself face to face with the Alpha King of the Ashveil realm. Her knees hit the floor before her mind caught up with her body. I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush, tumbling over each other. I'm so sorry, my king, I didn't hear you enter. The dress was there and I only meant to fold it. I wasn't thinking, please, please don't punish me. She pressed her palms to the stone floor. Her heart was not beating. It was detonating. Silence followed. Heavy. Dangerous. She waited for the summons of guards. For the cold, clipped command to remove her. Instead. Look up. Low. Quiet. Not shouted. Which somehow made it worse. She lifted her eyes. She had seen the Alpha King from a distance before, in the Great Hall, on the training ground, crossing the inner courtyard at a pace that made everyone step aside without being asked. But from a distance was not the same as this. Up close, Selim Draveth was not what the servants whispered. They whispered about ice. About control. About a man whose temper you never wanted to find. All of that might be true. But up close, there was something else. He was tall. Broad through the shoulders. Dark hair pushed back from a face that looked like it had been carved rather than born. Sharp jaw, stark brow, grey eyes the color of winter stone on the morning after a hard frost. Not soft handsome. Something more unsettling than that. He was looking at her the way you look at a door you were certain led somewhere familiar. And it opened onto a room you'd never seen. Stand up, he said. She hesitated. Stand. She stood. Unsteady. Heat in her face. The silk shifted around her as she rose and she nearly grabbed the bedpost to keep from swaying. He didn't reach for her. But he didn't step back, either. He studied her face. Like a man reading a map he was certain he understood, until he realized the entire time, he'd been holding it upside down. Who are you? Elira, my king. I'm assigned to the Queen's East Wing chambers. How long? 3 years. Something moved through his expression. She couldn't read it. Not yet. 3 years, he repeated. Slowly. Yes. And I have never seen you before. It was not a question. She had no answer for it. He stepped closer. Not aggressively. Deliberately. She held her ground with everything she had. He leaned in slightly, not the way a man leans to intimidate, but the way a wolf leans when it has caught something on the wind and needs to be certain. Inhaling. She felt the warmth of his breath on her throat. And then. He went absolutely still. Every single thing about him stopped. Not the stillness of shock. The stillness of recognition. The stillness of a wolf in the forest when it finds the trail it has been searching for without knowing it was searching. When he spoke again, his voice had changed entirely. Stripped of command. Stripped of authority. Just raw. Just honest. Just a man saying the one thing he hadn't planned to say. Why does my wolf recognize you? The question fell into the room like a lit match into still water. It spread. And spread. And kept spreading. Elira's lips parted. She had no answer. Because she didn't understand the question. Not with her mind. But her body. Her body understood something. Because deep inside her, in the place she had learned to ignore, the instinct she had pressed down so thoroughly she sometimes forgot it existed, something stirred. Quiet at first. A breath. A shift. Like something waking from a very long, enforced sleep. Like something that had been waiting for exactly this. And then. Footsteps. Outside the door. The Queen's voice. Clear. Melodic. Perfectly composed. Your Majesty? Are you inside? She watched the Alpha King's expression change. Not to guilt. Not to fear. To something much more deliberate. Calculation. He moved before she could react. His hand closed around her wrist, not hard, not rough, but completely certain, and he pulled her sideways, toward the wall, to a panel she had cleaned around 100 times and never once noticed. It clicked. It opened. Darkness beyond. He guided her inside. Followed. Let it close. And in the narrow black space behind the palace wall, pressed against the chest of the Alpha King, Elira Vasne tried to remember how to breathe. She could feel his heartbeat. Slow. Steady. Completely, impossibly unbothered. Like this was nothing unusual. Like this was simply a Tuesday. Her own heart was a disaster. Don't make a sound, he said. Barely a breath, close to her ear. She nodded. On the other side of the panel, the Queen's footsteps entered the room. Paused. Moved to the vanity. Paused again. Then retreated. The door closed. Silence. And the Alpha King still didn't move. He stayed. In the dark. Close. His warmth pressing through the narrow space between them. And Elira noticed something in the dark that she could not explain away. He was facing the panel. Standing between her and the door. Not hiding himself from the Queen. Hiding her from the Queen. Why? What did he know? What wasn't he saying? The panel clicked again. Light flooded in. He stepped out. She followed. He looked at her once, unreadable, and said, "Take the dress off. Then go to your room." He moved to the window. She changed quickly, her back to him, her hands shaking with something she refused to name. She laid the dress on the bed. She should have left. She should have walked out, gone straight to the servants' quarters, and spent the entire night convincing herself that none of this had happened. But the question was still in the air. It was still everywhere. "Why does my wolf recognize you?" "My king," she said carefully. He turned. "Why did your wolf recognize me?" A long, measured pause. Then, "I don't know yet." He looked at her directly. "But I intend to find out." It was not a threat. It didn't feel like comfort, either. It felt like a door left open on purpose. And she walked out into the corridor, and the door stayed open behind her. She felt it at her back the entire way to her room. Chapter 3. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling that she knew every crack of, listening to the wind drag itself over the palace rooftop, and tried to do the thing she was best at. She tried to make herself unremarkable. She tried to compress the evening into something small. Something that fit neatly in the box in her chest where she put the things that couldn't be processed. The warmth of his arms. The certainty of them. The way he'd said it, "You finally came back to me," like he had been standing at a door for a very long time. Knocking with a patience that was almost unbearable. Waiting for something that he wasn't even sure would come. She pressed her eyes shut. She pressed her palms flat against the blanket. Stop. She didn't know who she was telling. Herself. Or the thing inside her that had stirred when he inhaled near her throat. The thing that had woken up and stretched and looked around like it recognized the room it found itself in. Her wolf. The part of her nature she had suppressed so completely, for so long, that most days she forgot it existed at all. There were no wolves in the Borderlands ward house. No pack to teach her. No elder to guide the shift. No one to tell her what the restlessness in her blood meant, or what to do with the way the wind sometimes called her, or why she could sometimes hear heartbeats through stone walls. She'd taught herself to ignore it. Told herself she was a maid. Maids didn't have wolves. Maids didn't have anything that complicated their ability to work quietly and be forgotten. But tonight, the wolf was not willing to be quiet. It pressed against her ribs like a hand against glass. Not threatening. Insistent. She turned onto her side. She pressed her face into the pillow. And she whispered into the fabric, very softly, so that no one in the room could hear. Not tonight. The next morning, Marin reassigned her. Not to the east wing. To the lower gallery. Different floor. Opposite side of the palace. Elira didn't question it. She picked up her cleaning kit and moved. 2 days later, she was reassigned again. To the main corridor on the second floor. 3 days after that, to the private library. She noticed the pattern. She told herself not to notice the pattern. She kept noticing it anyway. And on the 31st day after the night with the dress, She looked up from the shelf of histories she was dusting and found the Alpha King at the far end of the library. Reading. Or appearing to read. He hadn't entered with announcement or entourage. He was simply there, standing at one of the long tables, his attention apparently absorbed by an open book. She watched him for one full breath. Then turned back to her work. She was very focused on the shelf. Extremely focused. More focused than she had ever been in her life. She heard him across the room, not moving. She made it through 9 full minutes before she allowed herself to glance over. He was not reading. He had not turned a single page. He was watching her. And when her eyes met his, he looked back down at the book without expression. Like nothing had happened. Like he had not just spent 9 minutes watching her dust history volumes. She went back to the shelf. Her heart was a problem she did not have time for. Chapter 4. It was her closest friend who saw it first. Her name was Dessa. 3 years older than Elira. Tall, lean, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue and the kind of loyalty that ran deep once it was earned and never ran shallow after that. Dessa found her in the laundry room 12 days later. Early morning, before the palace woke. Elira was folding linen, moving fast and automatically, keeping her hands busy so her mind didn't have to be. Dessa sat on the edge of the table, crossed her arms, said nothing. That was worse than if she'd spoken immediately. Elira kept folding. The Alpha King walked past the laundry archway yesterday, Dessa said finally. That's unusual. That's what I said. A pause. He doesn't come to this wing. He has never come to this wing in 3 years of my service here. Perhaps he was looking for something. Perhaps. Dessa tilted her head. Perhaps he found it weeks ago and keeps coming back to make sure it's still there. Elira's hands stilled on the linen. She looked up. Dessa's expression was not amused. It was worried. Only Dessa called her that. What happened in the Queen's chambers that night? Nothing. Don't. Dessa. I have known you 3 years. Her voice went soft, but it didn't give. You've been different since that evening. Quieter. More careful. Like someone walking on ice and measuring every step. A pause. And he has been appearing near you. He is the Alpha King, Elira said. He doesn't think about maids. Dessa looked at her for a long moment. Are you certain about that? The question sat there. Neither of them answered it. I have to finish before breakfast, Elira said, and picked the linen back up. Dessa watched her. Then stood. And as she walked to the door, she said something that made no sense. Not then. Be careful, Elle. Be careful of remembering something that was taken from you before you were old enough to know it was gone. The door closed. Elira stood in the laundry room alone. Her hands had stopped moving. The wolf pressed against her ribs again. Steady. Urgent. Like someone knocking. Taken from you before you were old enough to know. She stood there for a long time. And then she set the linen down. And she started thinking about the archive. Chapter 5. The palace archive was technically restricted to senior administrative staff. Technically. In practice, the archivist, an old man named Torben with clouded eyes and a reliable habit of sleeping between 10 in the morning and noon, created a window of opportunity for anyone determined enough to use it. Elira used her half-day rest on a cold Tuesday. She waited until the hall clock struck the half-hour past 10. She slipped in. She found the Borderlands registrations. She found the volume covering the year she was born. She ran her finger down the column. Found her name. Vasne. Elira. Female. Born 4th day, Frost month. Borderlands Ward 3. She had seen this entry before. On her intake form when she'd first applied to palace service. She'd read it a dozen times and felt nothing but the vague, familiar ache of having very few facts to hold about herself. But tonight she looked at the columns around her entry. And she noticed something she had never noticed before. Every other entry in the register had a notation in the second column. A small code. Pack origin. A letter followed by 2 numbers. Her entry had nothing. Blank. An intentional, careful blank. Her chest went tight. Everyone in the Northern Realm had pack origin. Orphans. Strays. Borderland children with no known family. Everyone. Unless someone had gone back in and removed it. She turned to the addendum volume. The corrections register. The one kept for formal amendments. Her name appeared once. In a different hand. Smaller. Careful. Like someone who didn't want to write much. Origin sealed by order of the High Council. Reference, Accord of the Unnamed Daughters, FR 7. She read it 3 times. The Accord of the Unnamed Daughters. She had never heard of it. But the date of the notation. It matched her birth year. Exactly. Someone had sealed her pack origin the same year she was born. Someone with enough authority to reach the palace archive. Someone who hadn't wanted her to find where she came from. She stared at the page. Her pulse was very loud. She closed the volumes carefully, replaced them exactly as she'd found them, and walked out into the corridor on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. And walked directly into the Alpha King. He caught her by the shoulders before she went down. They stood face to face in the empty passage. His hands on her shoulders. Her heart in her throat. The scent of him hit her instantly. Pine resin. Cold stone. Ember warmth beneath it. Her wolf reacted before she could stop it. It surged forward like a tide, pressing against the inside of her chest so hard she nearly lost her breath. "You went to the archive," he said. Not a question. She looked at him sharply. "You knew I would." Something moved through his face. "I was beginning to think you never would," he said. "You know something." Her voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. "About me. You already know something." He studied her. That same look. The one that looked like solving something impossible. Then, "Come with me." Chapter 6. His private study was warm. It smelled of him, pine, cold stone, the ember depth beneath, and of old books, and of the particular quiet that settles in rooms where difficult things have been decided. Elira stood near the door. He poured 2 cups of something warm without asking what she wanted, and set them on the desk between them. He Saturday. She didn't. "Sit," he said. "I'm a maid. And I am asking you to sit." She Saturday. The drink was spiced bark and honey. She wrapped both hands around the cup and waited. He looked at her for a moment. Like he was choosing where to begin. Then he said. "The Accord of the Unnamed Daughters was ratified 17 years ago." She kept her face still. It was a political arrangement made by the High Council. 3 packs were involved. The Ashveil, the Mirren, and the Coldvast. The 3 great northern bloodlines. Everyone knew those names. There was a succession crisis, he continued. The Ashveil line was at risk. My father was king then. He had 1 son. A pause. Me. He set his hands on the desk. His alliance with the Mirren pack secured an heir continuation, meaning I was designated to take the Mirren Alpha's daughter as my future queen when the time came. Elira was following. But she didn't yet see where she fit. The Mirren Alpha's daughter was Serevna, he said. The queen's name. She was trained from childhood. Politically, strategically, in every way that could be prepared for. She was exceptional. He paused. But a true mate bond cannot be trained. Silence. My wolf never recognized her. From the night of our bonding ceremony to this day, it never settled. Never accepted. Never reached for her the way it was supposed to. His jaw tightened slightly. I told myself it would come with time. That a bond built through choice and loyalty could eventually override instinct. He looked at her. Grey eyes. Steady. I was wrong. Elira's grip on the cup tightened. The same year the accord was ratified, he continued, a woman in the borderlands gave birth to a daughter. Coldvast bloodline. The 3rd pack in the original agreement. Her breathing became very deliberate. That woman was part of a contingency written into the accord. A fail-safe clause. If the primary bonding arrangement failed to produce a true mate acceptance within 20 years, a hidden heir would be called forward. The words fell through her like ice water from a height. A hidden heir. Born of a Coldvast female and an Ashveil blood sire, he said quietly, carrying both bloodlines. Designed to be a compatible true mate for the Ashveil Alpha King. She heard the word designed and understood, in a distant, cold way, that he had chosen it deliberately. That he was giving her honesty even when the honesty was hard. You think, she started. I don't think, he said. His eyes held hers. My wolf has never been wrong in 32 years. It has never reached for a person it didn't know. It has never recognized a scent it had never encountered. A breath. The night you wore that dress, The night you were standing in the candlelight, it didn't hesitate. It didn't question. It recognized you the way it was supposed to recognize Tsarevna 17 years ago. Completely. Immediately. Without doubt. He set his cup down. You are the hidden heir, Elira. Your pack origin was sealed the day you were born by Councillor Hearn, the same man who drafted the failsafe clause. She felt the floor attempt to disappear beneath her. That's not possible, she said. You found the blank column in the register. A blank column doesn't mean. It was sealed on the 4th day of the frost month, he said. The day you were born. She stared at him. And then a different thing hit her. Harder than the rest. You've known. Her voice came out very quiet. How long have you known? He was silent. Selim. His name came out without permission. She felt it leave her and couldn't take it back. It landed between them like something with weight. His jaw shifted slightly. 3 weeks after you arrived in the palace, he said. She stared. The archive was flagged the day you completed your intake registration. I received notice immediately. I had the entry reviewed. The number arrived in her brain slowly. 3 weeks after she arrived. 3 years ago. 3 years, she said. Not loudly. Quietly. But it hit like a struck bell. You have known what I am for 3 years. And you said nothing. He didn't look away. Didn't flinch. It wasn't. Don't, she said. And he stopped. Chapter 7. 3 years, she said again. Her voice was low. Controlled. She had too much practice controlling things to let it crack now. 3 years of making your wife's bed. Folding her dresses. Keeping my eyes down because that is what I was told good servants do. Believing I was nobody, that there was nothing for me, that this was simply what my life was. She looked at him. While you knew. He stood. Elira. While you watched me from the library and said nothing, she said. While you walked past corridors where I worked and never once. I was trying to protect you. The words landed differently than the others. She felt them differently. Not because she wanted to, but because the look on his face was not the one of a man making an excuse. It was the look of a man who had carried something heavy for a very long time and was not asking for credit for it. The accord is not public knowledge, he said. If word had spread that an Ashveil Coldvast hidden heir existed, that I had a true mate outside my political bonding. He paused. Tsarevna's father would have had you removed before you were old enough to threaten the arrangement. The room went cold. Lord Vane Mirren commands 3,000 soldiers, he said. He has a blood treaty with 2 independent pacts in the Southern Territories. If I had declared you openly, if I had rejected Tsarevna publicly without securing alternative alliances. He stopped. Breathed. They would have moved against the Ashveil. Against my court. And against you. By name. Specifically. Elira looked at the fire. Not because she couldn't face him. Because she needed a moment to let that settle. I have spent 3 years holding alliances, he said. Building relationships that don't depend on the Mirren bond. Preparing the political ground so that when the truth became known, there would be something to stand on. A long beat. The ground is prepared now. Did it occur to you, she said slowly, still looking at the fire, to tell me? He was quiet. To come to me, 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago, and say, you are not forgotten. You are not invisible. I know what you are, and I will not let it be used against you. She turned to him. Did it occur to you that knowing might have changed something? That walking these halls for 3 years believing I had been entirely abandoned might have been different, even a little, if I had known that someone had not abandoned me. A silence that had texture. That had weight. Then, barely above a breath. Yes. He looked at her directly. It occurred to me every single day. She looked away again. Her chest hurt in a way that had no name. This man had known her worth when she didn't know it herself. Had protected it in the dark where she couldn't see. And had said nothing. She didn't know whether to be furious or broken open. Both, she decided. Both at once. What happens now? She asked. He crossed to the window. Now I ask you something. He turned. Are you willing to let me make this right? She stood. She picked up her cup. She walked to the door. And she said, without looking back, I need time to think. She felt his gaze at her back. "Take what you need," he said. And the door opened. And she walked out. And the fact that he let her, without argument, without command, was somehow the most confusing thing that had happened to her all night. Chapter 8. She didn't go back to her room. She went to Dessa's. Knocked. Dessa opened the door, looked at her face for exactly 2 seconds, and stepped aside without a word. She poured tea. Small pot from her windowsill. 2 cups. They sat across from each other in the narrow room. Elira told her everything. Every word of it. When she finished, the tea was cold and Dessa had been silent for a long time. "My mother served this palace before Tsarevna came," Dessa said finally. Elira looked up. She was here during the accord ratification. She didn't know the details, but she knew there were sealed arrangements. Hidden agreements from that period. She paused. "I suspected you were connected to them." "You never said anything." "Because I didn't know if knowing would protect you or endanger you." Dessa's eyes were steady. "And because you seemed like someone who needed to find truth at her own pace." Elira wrapped her hands around the cold cup. "Do you believe it?" Dessa asked carefully. "What he told you?" "My wolf hasn't been quiet since that night," Elira said. Something passed through Dessa's expression. "Then you already have your answer." "A beat. The question is whether you're ready to fight for it." "Fight." Dessa set her cup down. If this becomes known, what you are, what he intends, the Queen will not simply step aside." Her voice dropped. "And Tsarevna is not a woman who loses things gracefully." And then, as if the universe had heard the name and decided to answer it, the door to Dessa's room opened. Without a knock. Servants' quarters had no standing for intrusion. But the woman in the doorway had never been limited by staff protocol. Queen Tsarevna. Tall. Pale. Flawlessly dressed even at this hour. Dark copper hair pinned in elaborate coils, a gown the deep blue of winter midnight. She looked at Elira the way you look at something you have been expecting for a very long time. Not with surprise. Not with rage. With a strange, exhausted recognition. "So," the Queen said softly, "you're the girl he keeps appearing near." Dessa had gone rigid. Elira stood. "Your Majesty." "Don't." Tsarevna stepped inside. Closed the door behind her. "Don't perform courtesy at me. We're well past that." She looked Elira up and down. Not with contempt. With the frank, careful assessment of someone taking stock of something important. "He told you," she said. Not a question. "Tonight." Something shifted in the Queen's face. Something that was not the cold marble the palace whispered about. Something that looked, startlingly, like exhaustion. Like someone who had been performing composure for so long their bones ached with it. "I have known about the accord since I was 12 years old," Tsarevna said. The room went very still. "My father told me himself. That I was being sent to a man whose wolf might never accept me. That if it didn't, there was a contingency. Another girl. Chosen before either of us could form opinions about our own lives." Her hands were clasped in front of her. Tightly. "Do you know what it is," she said, "to spend 20 years being exceptional at everything you can control? Your manner, your strategy, your appearance, your politics, knowing that the one thing you cannot manufacture is either present or it isn't." She paused. And it wasn't. The fire crackled. "I don't hate you," the Queen said. Elira blinked. "I wanted to. I tried quite hard. A ghost of something that might have been rye. I find I'm too tired for it." She moved to the window. "What I need you to know, what no one else in this palace will tell you, is that the moment he acknowledges the bond openly, my father will move." "What does that mean?" Tsarevna turned. "Lord Vane Mirren did not send me to this palace to find love. He sent me to permanently bind the Mirren bloodline to the Ashveil throne. If that bond breaks..." Her expression tightened. "He has alliances you don't know about. Old pacts in the northern territories that have been waiting, patiently, quietly, for an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" The Queen looked at her directly. "To ensure the Ashveil bloodline does not survive this generation." Chapter 9. The silence after those words was total. Elira stared at the Queen. The Queen stared back. "Why are you telling me this?" It was the only honest question she had. Tsarevna was quiet for a long moment. "Because I know what is coming," she said finally. Whether either of us prepares for it or not, the bond between you will surface. It cannot be suppressed permanently, not a true bond. The wolf doesn't forgive that kind of suppression for long. She moved toward the door. And because... She stopped. Started again. Because Selim is not an easy man to know. He is not easy to be near, or to understand, or to reach. A pause. But he is not cruel. And the 3 years he chose silence, he chose it for you. Not for himself. Something pressed against the inside of Elira's chest. I spent a long time being angry at him, the Queen said quietly. For never loving me. For knowing it and saying nothing. But I watched him these past months. Watched him become careful. Deliberate. Like a man who has finally decided exactly what he is going to do and is moving toward it with a patience that is almost painful to observe. She paused at the door. He was ready the night you wore my dress. I think perhaps he has been ready for some time. She looked at Elira. What I am asking, the only thing I am asking, is that you tell him what I've told you tonight. About my father's reach. His allies. The full extent of what moves the moment the bond becomes known. Why? Elira asked. Why help him, after everything? The Queen was quiet for a beat. And when she answered, her voice was so small that Elira almost didn't hear it. So human that it didn't sound like the Queen at all. Because if this arrangement is going to end, if the accord finally breaks the way it was always going to break, I would rather it break with honesty. With intention. Not in shadows and secret rooms. She opened the door. I was hidden long enough, she said. And she left. Elira sat in the quiet of Dessa's room. And realized that the most honest, most human conversation she had experienced in 3 years inside that palace had just been with the woman she was about to replace. She went to him in the morning. He was in the east courtyard alone, working through combat forms in the pale winter light. Moving with the precise, automatic quality of a man who trained not for performance but because physical discipline was the only thing that gave certain kinds of internal noise somewhere to go. She stood at the entrance. He stopped when he saw her. She said, "The Queen came to me last night." He went very still. She told me about her father. About the allied pacts. About what moves the moment you declare the bond openly. A beat. Are you afraid? He asked. She considered it honestly. Yes. Good, he said. She frowned. Fear means you understand what's at stake. He crossed the courtyard toward her. Anyone who walks into this without fear isn't paying attention. He stopped an arm's length away. Close enough that she could smell the cold morning air on him. And beneath it, pine and ember and the particular warmth that her wolf had apparently memorized without her permission. The wolf inside her rose slightly toward him. Like a tide responding to a pull it couldn't explain and wasn't interested in arguing about. She breathed it back down. What's the plan? She asked. His eyes stayed on hers. I want you to meet with my council, he said. Quietly. Not as a maid. As what you are. She swallowed. And what am I? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the candlelight, that first night, when everything changed. You are the true Luna of the Ashveil pack, he said. Quietly. Absolutely. And it is past time the palace knew it. Chapter 10. 3 days of preparation. 3 days of quiet meetings in the study, poring over pact treaties, council alliances, the legal framework of the accord. Selim explained everything. Patiently. Without condescension. Like he was speaking to someone whose understanding mattered. She asked questions she was afraid to ask. He answered every one. She learned that the accord's failsafe clause was ironclad, designed specifically for situations where the political bonding failed the true mate test. The High Council had ratified it. The document existed. Her sealed origin was on record. The law was on her side. The law had always been on her side. She had simply not known it. The council meeting is arranged for the day after tomorrow, Selim said on the 3rd evening. 7 councillors. 4 of them I trust. 2 I'm uncertain about. 1. Lord Edrin, she said. He looked at her sharply. Dessa told me about him, she said. She says he has Mirren sympathies. She's right. He leaned back slightly. You trust her? She's been more honest with me in 3 years than most people manage in a lifetime. Something moved through his expression. Warmth, maybe. Or something closer to recognition. Good, he said. She should be in the room with you. She's a maid. You were a maid 3 days ago. His voice was measured. I intend to be careful about what that distinction actually means going forward. Elira looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. He met it without flinching. And then, because it had been pressing at her for days and she was tired of carrying it alone, she asked, "What did it feel like? When you walked into that room and you thought I was her?" He was quiet. When I walked in, the candlelight, the dress, my wolf moved before I did. Before I could think. A pause. It was the thing I had spent 17 years waiting to feel. The pull. The certainty. The sense that something was finally. He stopped. Right, he said quietly. After 17 years of everything being wrong. She felt the weight of that. The specific ache of it. And when I turned around, she said, I expected anger at myself. I expected the humiliation of having believed, however briefly, that something could be. He looked at her. Instead I saw your face. And my wolf didn't recoil. It didn't go quiet. A beat. It got louder. She breathed. The wolf in her chest was very loud right now. She pressed her hand flat against the table to steady herself. This isn't simple, she said. No. There will be war. Possibly. People could be hurt because of me. People are always hurt in the vicinity of power, he said. The question is whether the power is being used for the right reasons. She looked at him. Are we? The right reasons? He looked back. And he said, very simply, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. The wolf in her chest answered him. Not in words. In the quiet, ancient way of wolves. Low and certain and done arguing. Done waiting. That night, she didn't sleep again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was something else. She lay on her narrow bed and she thought about the girl in the mirror. The girl in silver silk. The one who looked like someone who existed. She thought. Maybe she was always there. Maybe she was just waiting for someone to open the right door. Chapter 11. The council chamber was old stone and high windows and 7 chairs arranged around a long table that had seen more history than most of the men who sat at it. Elira walked in with her head up. Dessa at her shoulder. Selim standing at the head of the table, watching. She wore no silk. She wore her own clothes, clean, plain, the best she had. She wasn't performing royalty. She was showing them what she was before royalty had been the plan. Let them see the gap, she had decided. Let them understand exactly what they had asked a girl to carry without telling her why. The council members looked at her with varying degrees of reaction. 4 of them, the ones Selim had called trustworthy, with careful neutrality. Assessment. Respect. Even. 2 with uncertainty she could read clearly on their faces. And 1, Lord Edrin, 3rd seat from the left, a man with a grey beard and eyes that never quite settled on you directly. With a stillness that was not neutrality. That was recognition. He had known who she was. The moment she walked in. She was certain of it. Selim presented the accord. The original documents. The failsafe clause. The sealed archive entry. He presented it cleanly. Without theatrics. The way a man who has been preparing a case for 3 years presents a case that is airtight. The 4 trusted counselors asked measured questions. They received clear answers. The 2 uncertain ones looked between her and the documents and the Alpha King with expressions that were slowly settling into something that looked like acceptance. Lord Edrin asked nothing. Said nothing. Sat absolutely still. Which was a thing she filed away. The council vote was 4-2 in favor of formally acknowledging the accord's failsafe and proceeding with the process of recognizing Elira's status. Lord Edrin abstained. After they filed out, Selim looked at her from across the table. That went better than I expected, he said. Lord Edrin, she said. I know. He'll send word to Vane Mirren tonight. Yes. She looked at him. How much time do we have? His expression was measured. Honest. Days. Perhaps a week if we're fortunate. Then we move quickly. He looked at her, that same look, the solving look, but it had shifted. It was no longer a look of confusion. It was one of steadiness. Of someone looking at the person beside them and seeing exactly who they are. Yes, he said. We do. They were not given a week. That same night, at the hour before midnight, when the palace had gone quiet and the fires burned low in the corridors, the first howl rose from the northern tree line. Distant, but unmistakable. 3 more followed. Then a cascade. She heard them from the window of the room she'd been moved to, one of the secondary guest chambers, which still felt surreal, which still felt borrowed, and felt the hair on her arms rise. Not from fear. From recognition. Her wolf knew those howls. Not individually, but collectively. Wolves in numbers. Moving with purpose. Not hunting. Announcing. She was dressed and in the corridor before the palace guard reached her door. Selim was already at the inner wall. He looked back when she appeared, and something in his face shifted. Relief, maybe. That she was here. That she was still here. There at the northern pass, the guard captain said. Mirren colors. 200, maybe more. Selim nodded once. He looked at Elira. It begins, he said. She looked back at him. Then let's finish it, she said. Chapter 12. The delegation arrived with first light. Vane Mirren himself. Tall, severe, grey as the winter sky, with the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. He moved into the great hall like a man who owned it, flanked by 6 of his wolves, his expression the collected fury of someone who has been very patient for a very long time and has decided that patience is now over. Serevna stood to one side of the hall. Not with her father. With herself. She gave Elira one look when she entered. Not warm. Not cold. Acknowledgement. I told you. I warned you. Now it's yours to carry. Elira nodded once. And then she stood beside Selim at the center of the hall. She had spent the hours before dawn studying. Not strategy. Not politics. The accord itself. Every clause. Every condition. Every protection embedded in the failsafe. The clause was clear. If a true mate bond was identified and confirmed by the Alpha's own wolf after the bonding ceremony failed to produce recognition, the failsafe heir held equal standing to any political arrangement. The High Council's vote superseded pact claim. The votes had been cast. 4-2. She was on solid ground. She just had to stand on it without wavering. Vane Mirren looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter. You knew, he said. And you said nothing. I said everything that needed to be said, Serevna replied. To the people who needed to hear it. Something passed through the old Alpha's face. Elira watched him see his daughter clearly, possibly for the first time in years. See a woman who had made her own decision in the end. Who had chosen honesty over alliance. The Accord's failsafe is ratified law, Selim said. The Council has reviewed and confirmed the documentation. The archive entry exists. The mate bond has been confirmed. Vane's eyes moved to Elira. You, he said. A palace maid. She felt the edge in it. She didn't flinch. I was hidden, she said. By an agreement made before I was old enough to have a say in it. She looked at him directly. That agreement also protects me. I have read it. All of it. He studied her. Something shifted in his expression. Not retreat. Not quite. But the specific recalibration of a man who has come expecting to find prey and found something else. The northern packs outside my walls, Selim said, can stand down or they can test the Ashveil against its full strength. I have spent 3 years building alliances that don't depend on the Mirren bond for exactly this moment. A pause. The choice is yours, Vane. The silence in the great hall lasted long enough that Elira counted 17 heartbeats. Then Vane Mirren looked at his daughter one last time. Whatever passed between them was private. Was years old. Was probably a great deal more than this room would ever know. Then he looked at Elira. My daughter, he said slowly, chose you. Elira held his gaze. She chose honesty, Elira said. I think that was her choice long before I was part of it. Another silence. And then Vane Mirren turned. And walked out. His wolves followed. The hall exhaled. Elira felt Selim's hand close around hers. She looked down at it. His fingers interlaced with hers without ceremony. Without announcement. Without asking for permission or acknowledgement. Just certain. Just done. She didn't pull away. She held on. The frost month ended. The winter broke. And 3 weeks after the morning Vane Mirren walked out of the Great Hall, the announcement was made before the full assembly of the Ashveil court. Elira Vasne, true bloodline confirmed, accord documentation ratified by the High Council, mate bond acknowledged before witnesses, was formally recognized as Luna of the Ashveil Pack. She stood in the Great Hall in a dress that had not been borrowed. Not silver this time. Deep blue. The color of winter sky at the hour just before full dark, when light and darkness are still deciding between themselves. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Dessa stood in the second row. Not as a maid. As something else. Something that didn't have a title yet, but would have one soon, because Elira had no intention of navigating any of this without the one person who had been honest with her before it was safe to be. Tsarevna had left the palace the week before. Not in disgrace. Not in exile. By her own choosing. She had come to Elira the night before she left and stood in the doorway of the room that used to be a guest chamber and was now something more, and she had looked at Elira for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Something softer. Something I could dismiss more easily." A quiet beat. "I'm glad I couldn't," Tsarevna said. And she left. And Elira understood, as she watched the door close, that the Queen had given her something irreplaceable, not just the warning, not just the information about her father's reach. She had given her honesty, had modeled what it looked like to choose truth even when everything else was falling. She owed her a great deal more than she could repay. She would spend a long time trying anyway. On the morning after the ceremony, she went back to the Queen's former chambers. Now empty. Still draped in the things that hadn't been moved yet. She stood in the middle of the room. She looked at the mirror. At herself. At the girl in the deep blue dress who was no longer invisible. She thought about the silver silk. The curious impulse that had made her reach for it. The thing she still couldn't entirely name, the hunger to be seen, to exist in the same light as the things she spent her life maintaining for others. She understood it better now. It hadn't been envy. It hadn't been ambition. It had been recognition. Her wolf, suppressed, buried, half forgotten, had known what the archive had confirmed. She had belonged in that room. Not because she was performing royalty, but because she was the girl who had been quietly, persistently, stubbornly refusing to disappear even when every structure around her had been built to ensure she would. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't move. She watched the mirror. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at his reflection. "You came back here," he said. "I wanted to see it." A pause. Without the dress. He crossed the room. He stopped behind her. Not reaching for her. Not encircling. Just present. Standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. His reflection met hers in the mirror. Grey eyes. Dark hair. The face that had been solving something impossible from the moment it first saw her. And had, finally, solved it. "What do you see?" he asked. She looked at herself. At the girl with dark hair loose around her shoulders. At the girl who had worn a borrowed dress and found out it wasn't borrowed at all. At the girl who had been invisible. Who was not. Someone who was kept, she said. She felt him exhale slowly behind her. "Yes," he said. "A beat. Someone I should have told sooner." She turned. He was right there. Close. Certain. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been trying to understand for a long time. And have finally, at last, let yourself understand. "You're going to have to do better than 3 years of silence," she said. His mouth curved. "Just barely. Dangerous and genuine all at once." "I'm aware," he said. "I have a long list." "Tell me." "Starting with the fact that you rearranged my work assignments for a month without telling me why." "Guilty." "And you watched me in the library for 9 minutes without turning a single page." "That number is concerning." "I counted." Something warmer moved through his expression. "Of course you did." She looked at him. He looked at her. And his wolf, the one that had recognized her through a borrowed dress and candlelight, the one that had been waiting for 17 years to find what it was reaching for, was quiet. Fully. Completely. For the first time. Quiet the way water goes quiet when it has found the place it was always flowing toward. He reached up. Slowly. Lifted her chin gently. "I chose you," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. Not the accord. Not the failsafe. Not the wolf's instinct, though it was right about everything. A beat. I chose you. She held his gaze. I know, she said. And she did. Good, he said. And he kissed her. Not rushed. Not urgent. The way you reach for something you have been trying to reach for a very long time, and you are finally, at last, close enough to touch. Outside, through the high windows, winter was ending. The light was changing. And somewhere in the east courtyard, a wolf raised its head to the pale morning sky, and didn't howl. It simply breathed. Steady. Arrived. Home. And that's where I'll leave them. In the winter light. In the room where it began. The girl who was kept without knowing she was kept. And the man who spent 3 years preparing the ground so she would have somewhere to stand. Neither of them simple. Both of them choosing. That's the kind of story that stays with you, isn't it? Not the dress. Not the mistake. But what the mistake revealed. What part of this story stayed with you the most? The moment he recognized her, or the moment she recognized herself?